Today I wanted to talk about an issue that we found that's actually related to JavaScript SEO, but it's actually not, it's not really JavaScript. So we found out that quite a lot of content is not indexed in Google, even though the websites that have that content are not what we would say are JavaScript powered websites. So when I was preparing to this presentation, quite a lot of people reached out to me with a question, and actually I talked to Bastian Grimm, that you probably know, and he was like, oh no, you're gonna be talking about JavaScript SEO, isn't that dying, isn't that ending, isn't that something that's a little bit obsolete by now? And I was like, I'm gonna make it really interesting for you guys, because we found out that there are some interesting issues to talk about. And a while ago, I actually recorded a video. I was talking about the problem that JavaScript SEO is dying, because once Google is gonna get very, very good at rendering JavaScript, the whole need for JavaScript SEO is gonna disappear. So again, I recorded a video about that, and then a few months back, I got invited to Zurich by Martin Splitt. And for who of you know what Martin Splitt is dealing with? Raise your hands. Okay, most of you. So if you don't know, Martin Splitt is the person in Google responsible for dealing with people like me. So JavaScript, with people who have issues with JavaScript SEO on their websites. So Martin invited me to Zurich to Google Hangouts. And we actually had a lengthy conversation with both Martin Splitt and John Meller. And I was pretty sure I don't have John Meller's picture in this presentation. I kind of forgot about this one. So I shared my opinion with both John Meller and Martin Splitt about, okay, JavaScript SEO is dying, because once you guys are going to have more computing power to render it, it's not going to be needed anymore. And they actually, both John and Martin, went on like 7-10 minutes monologue, or we could call it a sales pitch for our services, saying that JavaScript SEO is going to be needed more and more and more. But that was all before we had all the interesting research. So after this conversation, we started to look into some of the interesting problems we found, and as we did, we actually realized that JavaScript SEO is a little bit more complex than we thought. So it's not only websites like Hulu.com, not only websites like Google Flights that are still completely that are still having massive issues with indexing of their own content because of JavaScript. We found out that all the community is saying, like, there are a lot of people in the community saying that JavaScript is evil, for a good reason, because it makes our work extremely complex. It makes SEO's work. We need to do a lot of extra steps because of that. So I wouldn't say that JavaScript is evil. I guess it's very, very complex, but there's a very good reason for that. But the main problem with saying that JavaScript is evil is that most of the websites right now moved out from HTML to HTML with a lot of JavaScript. So it's going to be very difficult to find any websites that you work with here that doesn't have JavaScript. And as I found out just yesterday night, Six's website, six.de, I know, Turnstone, that it's an old website that you're going to replace. Even this website has a very interesting JavaScript SEO issue, but none of us would call six.de a JavaScript-powered website. It was something that we would always refer to as HTML. Let me move forward with that. And one of the things that Googlers said in Zurich, that even HTML pages can be rendered, mostly because sometimes it's just cheaper for them, or not much more expensive than not rendering them. But we found that JavaScript is a problem for non-JavaScript websites, and we wanna. And this is something I wanna expand on today. And as an SEO community, we are used to what I call post-factum learning. So we basically wait until something breaks completely. There is a lot of drama in the community, and then everyone is going to fix that. And I guess the problem that we're seeing now with JavaScript is that the change is happening, but it's happening very, very slowly. This is like a very complex slide to understand. It's changing slowly. So the change is happening, but it's slowly, and it's not something that's going to make any website drop massively overnight. And as I said, JavaScript SEO evolved now from JavaScript SEO websites that we would see before to all websites we work with. And the irony behind all that is that one of my favorite examples is I used this article for a year as an example of a very interesting idea, but the content of this article is not important. The article is written by Googlers, by Googler about the cost of JavaScript. It's actually not important what the article is exactly about. The article is published on Medium. Who of you would say that Medium is a JavaScript website? Seriously. so if you look at the comments of underneath this article, they're not indexed in Google. And for me, that was like one of those extremely geeky jokes. Like I had a lot of laugh after I found this one. I'm guessing that whoever of you laughed, like you're geeks. Anyways, if we look at this very page, it has 500 referring domains, 2,000 backlinks, like tremendous amount of reads, claps, and whatever. So it's a very popular piece of content that we would assume that Google is going to crawl and render and index pretty often. Now, the problem is that this post was published more than a year ago, and Google still didn't find it because it's the whole comment part of Medium is powered by JavaScript, and now we're gonna get into why and this exactly happened. So for a few years now, we were thinking that there is like it was warm. There is a time frame of JavaScript indexing that we are waiting for 2 waves of indexing to happen and all that, but it actually got a little bit more complex with some of the research I'm gonna explain in a second. Long story short, we found that thousands of domains are not fully indexed even after months from publishing the content. So even if you publish your article, amazing article today, it may happen that it's not going to be like the URL is going to be indexed, but the content is not going to be indexed for a few months, or someone else is going to overrank you for your own content, which we're going to get to with 6th example in a second. So most of us before that would blame JavaScript. I think to future-proof that statement, if you want to do that, just blame rendering, because it kind of evolved towards rendering recently, and JavaScript is not as big. But let's go about, that's the biggest logo I could squeeze on a hoodie before going there, just FYI. So let's talk about what Googlers told me in Zurich, what's actually very, very interesting. So I asked them how rendering works with Google, and I was saying, okay, you're looking at the difference between the initial HTML, sorry, this is like small print, and they look, okay, if they render the content, they see if there's any change. So Google is going to look at the HTML version, and they're going to compare that with the rendered version. So if we now think about Medium, let's say that you're going to publish an amazing article on Medium. Google is going to render, like compare the version of this article with the rendered article. There's going to be no difference because there are no comments. So this is where we actually start to see a massive issue with the heuristics. They're having to find if your content relies on JavaScript. And I can just imagine Martin Schmidt that he hasn't fully grasped what triggers the heuristics. It's not because Martin is not good with that. He's an amazing guy. It's just basically I'm guessing that those heuristics are somehow relying on machine learning and things that are just not human readable. So they would see, okay, there's certain heuristics that if they see after a while, they look at the difference between rendered page and not rendered page. So again, Medium example. But I would say that those heuristics are still in infant stage. They're still pretty new. They're still playing and optimizing them, like Google algorithm in 2006, if you probably remember how easy those times were. And those heuristics are far from perfect. And what Martin actually said is that all new websites get rendered. And this is extremely interesting because from my point of view, okay, what's a new website? And the second problem I had, okay, all of our experiments that we did at Onely were based on new domains, new IP, and so on. So most of our experiments were kind of useless from this point of view. And what's a new website? So if you're gonna relaunch your CMS, so if you're gonna publish a new 6.de, is it gonna be a new website, or does it have to be a new domain? Or what if a new website doesn't have some kind of content that's user generated? So we started playing with that. And we're like, okay, with a lot of clients, you would actually advise to do an experiment on staging before publishing a new CMS. This was dumb looking at how it's structured. Like, you can't really test a new CMS because you're most likely gonna use a new domain, and you can't really index a new, like, play with that within your actual domain. So I wouldn't say you duplicate your content within 6.de. So we decided to experiment with how good Google is with their heuristics. We started playing with that a little bit more. And we started from rerunning our old experiments from 2019 because we found out that Google got much better at indexing JavaScript. So long story short, we had 3 domains, obviously new IPs, new domains, content generated with article, and we compared that to our experiment from 2017. In 2017, we had a page where homepage would link down with HTML links to like 6 or 5 levels deep, and with JavaScript, Google would only index homepage, go 1 link deep because link was generated by JavaScript, and they would give up for months. Actually, this page is still not indexed after 2 years. So we repeated that experiment just with a lot of different domains like jscrolling.party or htmlcrolling.wine. We went all crazy on the new TLDs. And like jscrolling.pizza is one of my favorites. So we played with that for a bit. And all of those were indexed within literally minutes. For one of those, you had to wait 1 day, but then it was indexed within minutes. So we saw a massive change, massive improvement with how Google is dealing with JavaScript content, but now we know it's all because it was a new domain. So our experiment from 2019 turned out to be somehow wildly successful, but this is not really useful for any of us because this was a new domain. So Google actually switched on crawling and rendering for a set period of time that we don't really know, just to see if JavaScript is changing the content here. So the new Google actually wins. And you know, that's a great job. Like, that's a massive improvement. That's a massive improvement with every single experiment. We couldn't create an experiment even with massive JavaScript load, so like heavy JavaScript scripts, to force Google to somehow fail to index it. We played with HTML to JS ratio, so we figured maybe it actually depends on how much content, looking at the Medium example, is generated by JavaScript. So we had one. Sorry, this is kind of small print, I didn't think it through. So entire content, so everything injected by JavaScript, just 1 paragraph and 1 word. So we had 3 types of test pages, all of them were indexed within, again, almost minutes. So most of the content was indexed within half hour. 5 URLs, we had to wait for a little bit for Google just to crawl it, not to index, just to crawl it. But then it was indexed again almost instantly. After 4 hours, all 29 out of 30 pages were indexed, and after 8 hours, all the test domains were indexed completely. So this actually turned out to be a massive win for Google as well. We couldn't somehow force Google to fail with indexing, something that wasn't possible 2 years ago at all. So as I said, this is a quiet change that's not somehow visible in the industry. we don't give up easily. So we figured we're gonna create one more experiment. We're gonna relaunch this experiment from 2017 that was massively popular. We did, long story short, I'm guessing you know where it goes. Again, Google didn't choke on any of the scripts, any of the frameworks, any of the setups, inline, external, doesn't matter. So again, Google won. So Martin Splitt was completely right about all the new websites. This is something that they designed well, and it actually works as they designed it for, again, new websites. But what about popular websites? So we figured we can't really play with experiments. We're gonna look at existing domains. And this is where it got really interesting. So can Google deal with real websites like 6DE, like a lot of other websites that have a little bit of content generated by JavaScript? And this was one of our most complex experiments that kind of dragged for a few weeks. It got a little bit out of control because we spent way too much time on it after seeing some of the changes. So National Geographic is a page, it's a website that's actually almost completely, you would say that this is a JavaScript powered website, because when you switch off JavaScript, everything disappears. Like the content is invisible almost completely, there is just a headline. Fun fact, this website has no issues with JavaScript indexing. We used a lot of random samples. We could never get National Geographic to choke with indexing. So this was a first for us. We actually saw, okay, there is a massive brand not having any JavaScript issue. And again, I never know how to pronounce that.
ASOS.
ASOS, thank you so much. I keep forgetting that. ASOS with JavaScript, ASOS without JavaScript. So most of the content is gone, and as you can already guess, 100% of JavaScript content indexed. So this is a massive change as well, something that we couldn't see in the wild 2 years ago. But not every website is lucky enough. This is enough of the positive examples here. We're gonna go into the most interesting zone of things that don't work yet, which is usually what SEOs love the most. This is a random sample. So we actually took a random sample of URLs, and this is where things got really interesting. So with a random sample, it was few hundred of URLs, Urban Outfitters, no JavaScript generated content indexed, JCrew, Topshop, Sephora 40%, H&M 73%, and T-Mobile, which is obviously run by German SEOs that did the best. It doesn't surprise me at all. But this was a random sample. Now let's look into two waves of indexing, how that actually works, what's the time frame of that. So we figure, okay, we know that something is not indexed, how the time is going to affect that. We looked at some of the interesting domains, and this is a percentage of JavaScript content not indexed after 14 days. So we would see, we would fetch sitemaps. We say, okay, this is a just published page. We would wait until the HTML or the URL is indexed, and from that moment of URL being indexed, you would measure time until JavaScript content is indexed. And this is the project that got out of hand because it grew way more than we expected. So The Guardian has 66% of content not indexed after 2 weeks, and you would assume that a newspaper. And this is not like a tiny bit of page. This is like a massive, I think it's, you may also be interested in, or like everything that they do for internal linking, or maybe not everything, like good bunch of links they use for internal linking for new content is not indexed. Target 30%. New York Post is actually very good at that, but CNBC, that's, I won't even comment. CNBC had a massive JavaScript issue. None of those websites here is something that we would year or 2 years ago, with one exception, call, with JavaScript powered websites. And this is where we, as a community, kind of failed for recently, because we would blame Google with that for quite a bit. Because sometimes as a community, that's what we do best, and I was guilty of that as well. Because looking at JavaScript SEO over 1 or 2 years recently is most of what SEOs did for JavaScript SEO, just recommended pre-rendering and that's it. In this case, I feel it gets a little bit more complicated because every single JavaScript SEO issue we saw was 100% self-induced. So we need to look at ourselves and developers and webmasters to fix those, because a lot of those issues, or actually every single one we worked with, wasn't Google's fault. It was basically a design flaw of how we use JavaScript. JavaScript community is growing very fast as well, so this is one of the side effects. Moving forward and talking about the timeline. Okay, so we're waiting for crawling and indexing to come together. This is something that Google is telling us they are going to announce pretty soon-ish, because they are, as we see, getting better and better with indexing the content. And I would say that this is happening soon. I wouldn't say this is happening next year or this year, but we're waiting for that. So when the two waves of indexing come together, in theory, the problem of JavaScript is gonna fade away, but it's gonna be a while. This is first. And secondly, I wonder how Google is gonna deal with pages. So they would have to render everything, like Medium, like The Guardian. So I wonder how granular is it gonna be, and at which point they're gonna just rendering every single page online. So what to do? So we had some big news a few days ago, and I want to explain that a little bit. So we've created OMFG, so Only Made for Geeks, a toolset that actually helps you, like a free toolset that helps you see some of the problems. Because we saw, okay, there's no way to see if your website has a JavaScript problem or not. It's still a very early version. We developed that fully within the last 3 weeks, or 4 weeks actually, right now. And there is a very good chance it may explode when you play with that. At some point, just email me and I'll apologize. So TGIF is the Google Indexing Forecast, part of the toolset. Is we look every single day the percentage of pages with JavaScript that's not indexed. This is a manually created data set of large brands and footprints. And we see, okay, how is it changing just for us SEOs to see, okay, Google is getting really close to indexing everything properly. So this is like and you can see also like after 1 week or after 2 weeks if anything is going to change. Should.
Okay, but that includes sites where you know that they have issues with JavaScript, or where you're fairly sure it's not their fault?
So we are including any brand. So if you send us, for example, The Guardian or any other page. So if you send us the page, we see, okay, there's a part that relies on JavaScript. We footprint that part. So we create, okay, sometimes like you may also be interested in, we fetch the sitemap. So it's quite a lot of work to do that manually, but I think the database now is growing to around 100, 200 websites, big websites, but for each page, we take quite a lot of URLs. It's constantly growing. So last time I talked to our research and development team, they were adding like tens of pages per day. So it's growing, and we manually footprint that. There is no way to automate that actually, which is, and you can also compare what's like if you want to get geeky, HTML delay and JavaScript delay. When JavaScript is not indexed, this is not JavaScript issue. This is a crawler budget problem. So they said if your JavaScript is not getting indexed, look into your crawler budget. So if you're okay, maybe there is some kind of correlation. This is an experiment we're working on. But we saw that quite a lot of pages struggle with having the HTML content indexed within even days. So this was a very good lead to look into. Anyhow, you can have a look at, for example, after 2 weeks, you can see, okay, some of the pages, like 90-something% of HTML is indexed, and out of that, 70% of JavaScript is indexed. So you can see the delay here is really big still. So after 2 weeks, HTML indexing for some of the dates would be like in the 80% for very big brands. So this is something we had to like quadruple check to, to publish because we couldn't believe that. So there's one tool that's actually quite interesting within the toolset. So WWJD, what would JavaScript do, obviously, and it compares the JavaScript disabled version versus JavaScript enabled version to see if there's any difference. You can see whole.com that quite a lot of content disappears. And we could assume that this is the content that relies on JavaScript. In this case, these are images, but if you have any text, there is a very good chance that Google is not going to pick it up as comment for Medium. And if you look at BBC Co UK, there's quite a lot of content that relies on JavaScript that disappears without JavaScript indexing. There's also one interesting thing that we compare is the non-rendered version versus rendered of major meta tags, because quite a lot of websites would change their canonicals no index with JavaScript. And to be honest, with our experiments, we're never sure which version is Google gonna respect more, because we saw both or mixed versions in our experiment. So again, looking at BBC, this is a very interesting example. So for HTML, BBC is showing BBC Home. For JavaScript, after rendering, it changed to BBC homepage. But it gets really interesting with canonicals, because after rendering JavaScript, the domain is going to change. So now, and again, this is BBC, so you would expect that to go a little bit better. This may be somehow influenced by how we test that, because we still can't believe that they would do it like that. But even if it is, this is something to look into. But these problems are definitely for Google, for BBC to fix. Also what we, I have arrows, fancy arrows, I'm sorry. I added, these are two animations I added myself. You can see how splashy they are. Oh, 3. I got kind of crazy. So you can see one more thing that's actually very interesting. Links added by JavaScript. So if you crawl your website without JavaScript, with, for example, a write or deep crawl or crawler of your choice, you will see two massive data, like two different data sets. There are different link graphs for those two websites. Which one matters in the end? This is something we can't agree internally in the office. One of the easiest way to pick a fight at Onely, just ask that question. Also links removed by JavaScript, which is even more interesting, because then it gets really confusing at this point. So if we look at BBC, this problem is real. And too long did it render, so TLDR is the last part of our amazing toolset, where you can actually see the cost of rendering your page. So you can see it's based on CPU and memory. So in case of 6, you're very good. And there is one winner. In our case, I had to run it a few times just to go to the green zone. But there is one page. Okay, BBC kind of got crazy with how they like. So why you need that? I should lead with that. You need that because if, in case of BBC, if your users have like cheaper mobile devices, that's the topic I spoke about quite a lot of times already. If your users have cheaper mobile devices, BBC is going to choke on them. So like Motorola's G4, cheaper Android devices, older iPhones are not going to deal well with such a load of rendering. So there is one page that won. This page is still our number one. This is SEO Oktoberfest. This page made by Marcus. There's 0 CSS, and the score is 2. So this is the most amazing score we had, because the cost of rendering is almost 0, and it's only because of one image. I guess if you would remove that image, it would go down to 1. So maybe you should go backwards in development. But anyhow, this is what I wanted to share with you. This is actually a use case of how you can play with our toolset. So I recorded a video to show the difference between the rendered and not rendered 6.de. So this is JavaScript disabled. Quite a lot of content is going to disappear. The website is much smaller. With JavaScript enabled, all the content here kind of appears out of nowhere. And this is problematic if you pick any of this content and you Google for it and find these websites. So I know that sixth, I asked Thorsten before coming on stage, I don't want to be one of these guys like get invited to an event and just then make fun of the website. So I asked, I know you replaced the website completely, but this is like most of the content from 6.de that relies on JavaScript. If you Google for it, you won't find 6.de ranking for that. But it's indexed. So if you use the cite command in Google search, you will find it. But you can see that some other, like what we see quite often, if your content relies on Google, it's very easy to overrank you with content that's rendered. So yeah, that's more or less it. There are no links, and there are links added by JavaScript. So this is a massive pain in the ass for your technical SEO team or your, because if some content if you add links, your internal links graph is gonna change. This is, I can see Thorsten like, yeah, we had that problem already. So this is just a use case of how you can do that. You can see that this problem also comes up in Mobile Friendly Tester somehow. And there are quite a lot of tools we're actually building to, to launch. But you can see that this is quite useful to play with your domains. It's completely free. And just to answer some of the Twitter questions, we're not going to gather your website's data and pitch them. We actually never pitched. We don't even have a sales team, but people are, people were very afraid that if they play with that, so people enter all the weird domains in those. I wouldn't want to call them. So now let's step away from JavaScript for a second. Let's talk about HTML. Let's go old school for a second. So let's see how quickly Google is going to index HTML content from The Guardian. Looking at 1,300 URLs, Google indexed 98% of HTML content from The Guardian. Pretty decent, I wouldn't complain. But it doesn't look as good for other brands. So The Guardian is fairly good, like most of the HTML, this is just HTML. So just if the URL is indexed. The Guardian is very good. But if we look at, for example, the Target, and you can expect an e-commerce website that's fairly big in States to be very well. So after 2 weeks, they get to 80%. 2 weeks from publishing products and content. So we can see, okay, this problem we're seeing is much bigger than just JavaScript SEO. Because if we look at the, for example, Eventbrite has 55 or 56% of their content index after 2 weeks. So you can imagine how much of a problem that is, because they will optimize those pages. They will figure, okay, why don't we rank well when actually half of their page is not indexed, half of their domain. So HTML seems to be very problematic. This is the second time I'm testing this amazing joke, so easy, don't look, and I think Philip saw that as well. So our head of research and development, Tomek, so Medium is one, my final example, Medium is Medium in indexing, that's the joke. Thank you. So with a quick check of 100 URLs from Medium, only 70%, and this is a random check, like this wasn't like after a time frame, 70% of them are indexed in Google. So Medium has massive issues indexing their content, something you wouldn't expect from a content platform. And then 50% of the content that's indexed has JavaScript content indexed. So this is kind of geeky, like, one thing and that's medium value. So that's the end of the joke. I tried it the second time. Oh, okay, it's fun in Munich. Okay, so noted. So you can see that this is a problem because, again, this is not a JavaScript problem. This is basically crawler budget HTML issue for everyone. And just one last slide. This is an example that I'm using quite a few times in a lot of conferences to actually show that this is dangerous. This is something to either, depending on the side of SEO you are, either play with or avoid. But we've created quite a lot of pages with content that's somehow sensible to a lot of people, like gun control, Trump versus Hillary, or Peppa Pig, if you saw the Peppa Pig drama with some of the violent contents. And we basically did a website that shows two completely different stories depending on if you switch on or switch off JavaScript. Google couldn't pick it up for this one, I think, for a year, so you can actually visit the page. And you can cloak anything with JavaScript. And this is extremely dangerous because if you Google, okay, Google is seeing that there should be gun control. So all the search engines will see, okay, gun control should happen, but once you render JavaScript, JavaScript is replacing not only the header, but the whole content to no gun control. And we saw some examples in the wild of people doing that for some of the big brands in the US, which was in the car industry as well, but not car rental, fortunately. So a lot of people are playing with that to somehow, inject quite a lot of content for search engines, but not for users. So they would say, okay, you would see, what we actually saw is you see just a listing page with just a photo of, let's say, a car and description, but Google is seeing like a massive spreadsheet of data and everything. And this works very well still. This is something that Google can't fix for, I'm guessing, technological reasons, or maybe they don't, maybe the scale is not big enough for them to worry it. So this is something, I actually showed it to Martin Split as well. So maybe they will somehow address that, but this is a massive issue. So again, depending on the side of SEO you're at, avoid that or play with it. Thank you so much. This is it. More data and more tools are coming soon, so just stay tuned, and thank you so much.